$1 billion business throughout the continent of Africa, even throughout Asia.
Yes.
And the ways in which, racism is embedded in everything. You can't escape it. So I think the misconception is that you have to be a mean, evil person as a white person to be racist. I think the reality is that racism, which again, racism is the idea, is accepting the fact that all of us have trauma. We all have things that we've gone through, and being able to accept yourself 100%. And I'll speak for us as a community, people of African descent, we need to reclaim our healing. Love yourself, even through the traumas, because often what happens for us, especially as Black women, is we're taught to have shame. So the opposite for me of shame is radical compassion.
Oh, oh. Then people like me, I just put everything to the back burner because it's a page in my life. It's gone. Leave it in the past and move on. The best is yet to come into the future. Now,
Absolutely.
before we go on, normally I don't do this, but when I'm speaking with an anti-racist thought, leader, we really need to acknowledge that as Black people, as immigrants, and being privileged to be on this land. So I'll just read the land acknowledgement, which I took from your site.
Beautiful.
So we acknowledge that we work and live on the ancestral territories of the Haldeman Tract, land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, and is within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, peoples. As Black people, we experience anti-Black racism on these stolen lands. Our liberation is bound up with Indigenous sovereignty. Thank you, my sister. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's get to the nitty gritty of it. What led you to anti-racism teaching?
Well, I think, for me as a child to immigrant parents, so both of my parents, they both are from Tigray, which is the northern part of Ethiopia, which has been experiencing a lot, of
Yeah.
instability in the last few years. And they left Tigray at different times in their lives, and they both fled and had to go to Sudan. My dad was a freedom fighter in Ethiopia against the regime that was there. And my family went from Ethiopia to Sudan. From Sudan, my parents went to Amman, Jordan. I was
Oh,
born in Amman, Jordan. Then my parents came here in the 1980s. They divorced upon arrival, and I grew up with my mother, single mom, in like the projects, the disinvested communities of Scarborough and Regent Park in Toronto. And so, I watched my mom go through all of those systems, and us having to live in cockroach infested apartments in of course, as an Ethiopian, as an African, our home was always beautiful. Even if we didn't have money, everything, like, it would look like there's no issues happening. But the
yes,
truth is, we were living in very disinvested communities and police surveilled communities.
yes.
And so growing up in that environment and watching my mom have to survive, and then also having to survive myself, being a survivor of abuse at the age of 9, sexual abuse at the age of 16, also assault, and having my son at the age of 21, being a single mom myself, and then having to not have access to university because I was streamlined in high school. In many ways, my story is like the typical Black experience in Canada in terms of the immigrant experience, being disenfranchised. And for a very long time in my life, I blamed myself, or I thought, I didn't try hard enough. This is just the reality for Black people. And it wasn't until I started to do my own kind of soul searching, which led me to books and readings and educating myself. And because I was a seeker, I was a seeker of truth. I think because I learned from my dad and my mom, my dad was very political. It really woke me up to asking questions like, okay, so why are so many Black people experiencing this in Canada? And that led me down the path of anti-racism and teaching and keynotes, and disrupting in every space that I go into, really.
It's beautiful because meeting you, and I have been in one or two of your sessions. Well, I registered on Facebook and ended up in there, and issues that I've had at work with, say, um, it has helped me I know how to talk, but the framing, the
Yes.
language and everything has helped me frame those issues, which was really stark. So, when the person is coming, it's like, oh, okay, you're speaking to somebody who understands, who's telling you their story. Don't tell me it's perceived. It is my lived story. Don't use that word for me. I am living
Mhm.
it. I'm feeling it. I'm going through it. So, on that note, thank you so much for what you do. I wish I'd met you earlier when I was a labor and delivery nurse in, around the Jane and Finch area at that hospital then, because as you're sharing your experience with single mothers, mainly black, single mothers, I did see a lot of that.
Mhm.
And some of the issues I had to contend with the other, say, nurses, were the questions: why are black women always so, yes,
Mhm.
yes. Even
Mhm.
for myself, I also did that. It's like, why do you have that attitude? But I needed to backtrack and really understand that we do have that because,
Right. And I think that the reality is there is a stereotype of the angry black woman, right? That's a stereotype that
yes,
was created in order to justify the violence that's perpetuated against black people historically in the continent of Africa, all across the Americas, and to justify colonialism, to justify enslavement. Because if you don't see a group of people as fully human, right, you
okay,
can justify the violence perpetuated against them. White women are allowed to cry, they're allowed to feel angry, they're allowed to have emotions, they're allowed to be fully human.
hmm,
But that same type of understanding and compassion and empathy is not provided to black women. So on one end of the, like you're saying, Nana, like we have the right to feel upset and to feel angry and to feel distrustful.
yeah,
And on the other side of that, there's a stereotype that is really all we are, is
always
angry and
angry.
right, which is not
Yes,
true.
yes, and popping out kids as teenagers.
Of course.
But then there's a deeper historical and social and political reasons why all these things, do occur. As we do talking about, racism and everything, if you don't mind and you can share maybe a personal experience with us, uh, about racism, because sometimes we speak about racism, new immigrants don't really understand it, that
Mhm.
this thing is called racism.
Mhm.
And so just for the new immigrants that are coming into Canada, that, if you don't mind.
Of course. I mean, there's thousands of stories that I could share. There's thousands of incidents. I can tell you something that happened last week, the week before that, constant.
Oh goodness.
Thank God I work from home, so I can try to, avoid a lot of the things that people that are going into work and physically having to be around,
Yeah.
groups of people can't. One thing I watched, for example, my mom go through growing up my whole entire life was the question that was always asked of her was, where are you from? And I remember, and I experienced it my whole life too, but I remember watching my mom when she first came to Canada in the 1980s. She was very proud to be Ethiopian. And so when her white coworkers would ask her, where are you from? She would at first she would share. She would say, oh, I'm Ethiopian. She'd want to share her culture, her food. You know how we are as Africans.
Yes.
We want to share, we want to come together. But over time, what she realized is that it was a way to other her. There was an idea in their mind that because English wasn't her first language, that she was less intelligent. So they would talk to her as if she was less intelligent. They would ask her questions about Africa. They would say like, oh, do you have cell phones? Do you have home phone? Do you have do you all have cars? Like very harmful, very unintelligent, really, and ignorant
Yeah.
questions that they would ask of her. And over time, what she realized is that there was a dehumanizing aspect of it. They would ask her where she was from, but when she would ask them where they from, they would say Canada. And over time, she understood that there was this
Oh,
understanding that white Canadians actually believed that they were actually Canadian, this Canadian identity, and that everybody else outside of whiteness was considered othered and different and unique and exotic and something to study or to pathologize. And so over time, my mom, she became the angry black woman as they would perceive her to be, but of course that's not true. Over time, when they would ask her, where are you from? She would go, Canada. And they would be like, no, no, but where are you really from? And she would say, Canada, because she understood how they were dehumanizing her in that moment, how they were othering her in that moment. It wasn't a reciprocal experience. Like, for example, me and you, if you ask me where I'm from, right? I'm going to say Ethiopia. You're going to say
Ghana.
Ghana. I know you're gonna, of course, from your name, I know you're Ghanaian. And so we would have, but we would share our culture. We would
Yeah.
share connection. It becomes from a place of connection, not from a place of, okay, our, basically
Superiority,
purity and
inferiority. Yes.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny you say this. I still get those,
Of course.
questions, and how I deal with them is different. So if you ask me, I say, okay, now we got to do geography. How good is your geography?
Right.
Yes. And they look at me. I say, yes, you're going to work it out. Give me three places on top of your head. I normally get Jamaica
Of
right
course.
off
The only country they know.
because they have a lot of Jamaican migrant farmers around the area. So every black person is Jamaica. I said no. Jamaicans came, many of them came from the West African subcoast forcibly. So you got to try again. And then somebody will say South Africa. I said, good, you're on the right continent. Continue. So I made them do it. And then it's like they will try, and give up. I said, okay. Then I tell them, give them a little bit of history about Ghana and tell them to Google it on the map. And they see it's like, oh wow. I said, okay. So
Mhm.
after that, my question to them is, what kind of white are you? And they look at me.
Ooh,
And I said, yes. And I said, listen, because you may look white, but your ancestry may have come from Scotland, England, Hungarian, Polish, whatever. Your white doesn't mean you are white.
that's it.
Even you look pink. So let's get to what kind of white are you? Do you know? And many of them don't know. So I said, go back and find out.
Absolutely.
So for me, I reframed it and actually sent them to go do their own work to understand that they don't even know half of the time what
Mm-mm.
their ancestry are.
That's incredible. That's brilliant.
It's so, and I found because of that, then it becomes difficult to get through me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grounded in us as black people, our
Yes.
history, our culture, and everything. And because I'm always also, as you say, learning, I
Mm-hmm.
learn across the board to be able to meet you, my sister from Ethiopia. At least if you bring me injera, I'm very happy.
Absolutely. And jollof rice, please. Thank you.
And
Look
jollof
great.
rice, we, we will make,
Yes.
so it's I tell the other girls that don't get upset. Make them work to find out where you are because some of them need teaching, they need training. You don't spoon feed them. But
Mm-hmm.
then that's me.
Yeah. It requires a certain level of confidence and
Yes.
groundedness to do that. I do think it's okay also to respond and say, I'm not going to answer that question. Where are you from? Or something
It's
like that. There's many different responses, but I love your
yes,
response. I'm going to steal that one. I really like it. I like that one.
no problem. So let's get to. I know I've how do we call it? Shared my experiences with that, but from your opinion, because you do a lot of this teaching and this work, what are some of the persistent misconceptions about racism like today?
Hmm.
Because people are trying to run. I'm not racist. I don't see color and all these things. Girl, I'm this color. I was born this color. I'll die color this color. So if you don't see this color, what is the meaning of that?
Right. Absolutely. It's like, I think it was Trevor Noah that said, when people say that they don't see color, especially when white people say that, it's like, okay, so when you're driving down the street and you see a red stop sign, do
You
you
get
just
to
go
pass
through?
through it.
Yeah, or do you, right. So it's not true. Color blindness
Mm-hmm.
doesn't exist. That's number one. Number two, when we're talking about racism, we're not just simply talking about people hating others because people, when they think of racism, they think of the Ku Klux Klan. They
Mm-hmm.
think of, hate groups. They think of saying the N word. They think of racial slurs, but they don't recognize that when we're talking about racism, we're talking about the idea that whiteness is considered the supreme standard, to which everything is measured by. So no matter what part of the world you go to, there's a standard, a human standard, a universal standard that everything is measured by. And whiteness holds a certain level of power and domination globally. And that's rooted in hundreds of years of stealing land, white Europeans stealing land, colonizing, attempting to strip Black and brown people of their culture, of their language, of their faiths, enslaving millions and millions of Black people in order to build labor, in order to build wealth and power. And so when we're talking about racism, it can be talked about on many different levels. It's talked about on a systemic level, right? On an interpersonal level, so how we interact. And then on an internalized level, racism is also the ways in which we as Black and brown people have been taught to not love ourselves, to not love the way that we look and the way that we are in the world, right? So we have to understand that racism is a system. It comes with an ideology, and it's the air we breathe. You cannot escape racism because you are nice, no matter how nice you are, kind you are, smart, no matter how many Black friends you have. We have all been taught to see whiteness as a supreme standard. One example of that is, skin bleaching is the number one.
Hello, viewers. We're back again. Today, I have with me a beautiful sister from Ethiopia, Selam Debs. If you've not seen her, if you've not watched her, then you are missing a lot. A lot, a lot. When we talk about anti-racism, thought, anti-racism teachings and everything, this sister is right on it. You cannot live in a society and be a contributing member without addressing some of the social, cultural, and political issues that affect us. And some of us may not have that voice, but she has that voice that addresses it. So, Salam, welcome to the Nana Yayabua podcast.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
You are very most welcome. So I'm going to just do a little bit about your background so people have an idea who you are, and then you can tell us who you are and the work you do, and it's the beginning story and everything, right? So my beautiful sister here, Salam, is a Black Ethiopian queer woman, an anti-racism educator. That is what I know you as, and I also know you own a yoga and you do reiki and all the good stuff, and you love yourself like there is no tomorrow. Jeez, I fell in love with that. How do you call it? You also a holistic life coach and a reiki master and a lululemon.
Lululemon. Yep.
Oh geez, Lululemon ambassador. But the what caught my attention is that she is first and foremost a mother.
Mm-hmm.
She is a mama, a singer, a poet, and a practitioner of self-love, acceptance, self-love, and radical compassion. What is radical compassion?
Well, I think radical compassion is accepting the fact that all of us have trauma. We all have things that we've gone through, and being able to accept yourself 100%. And a billion-dollar business throughout the continent of Africa, even throughout Asia,
Yes.
and the ways in which racism is embedded in everything. You can't escape it. So I think the misconception is that you have to be a mean, evil person as a white person to be racist. I think the reality is that racism, which again, racism is the idea that whiteness is the supreme standard, and whiteness has had domination and power and built their wealth and power off of Black, Indigenous, and racialized people globally. That is embedded in everything.
Yeah. And I think as we have in this conversation, Black History Month is also right around the corner. And one thing that I need to point out is that without the concept of race, that Black people are of a different race, and institutionalization of racism to make it okay
Right.
to actually enslave people of African descent. So I think that is very key. But I'm not sure that if you've come across this concept of ethnic racism.
Mm. You're talking about within cultures.
within cultures amongst the immigrant populations as
Oh,
well.
of course. I think when we think about ethnic racism, we're talking about like the cross-cultural aspect of, first of all, there's hierarchy within racial
Mhm.
groups. So let's say we remove white people out of it, and
Yes.
we're just talking about Black and brown people.
Yes.
There is a hierarchy, a racial hierarchy that actually, white Europeans created. So when they were trying to decide, okay, we want to steal this land, we want to take this land, we want to use these people for labor, they created ideas that they actually tried to say scientifically was proven that Black
Yes.
people's skin were thicker, that their brains were smaller, their skulls were smaller, that they were, meant to be enslaved, that brown people, they were meant to be harmed, but they actually were seen as a little bit more intelligent than Black people. So they weren't used for labor. So there was ideas of the model minority myth. Black people being at the bottom, dark-skinned Black people being at the bottom. And then there's a hierarchy of, other racialized groups
Mhm.
that are seen as they have experienced oppression, but they're not seen as oppressed as a Black person would be. And so we see that play out within our cultures, that there's this idea that there is a model group of racialized people who are non-Black, who are seen as more trustworthy, they're seen as working harder, they're seen as more intelligent,
Yeah.
and that creates a lot of problems within our communities, because it would be great if we could all unite and come together to
Yes.
fight against, obviously white supremacy and
Yeah.
racism. But the problem is those racial hierarchies do exist.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is that what you're speaking to?
Yes,
Yeah.
I did, because I had a personal experience that led me to a blow up out in public.
Tell me about it. What happened?
It was an Indian gentleman
Mhm.
who wanted to. The wife opened the vehicle. It hit my vehicle. There was no scratch, but because I was sitting and I was on the phone, it jarred me up. So when I felt that and I said, "You hit my vehicle," she said, "No." I said, "You did." That is why I looked up. So she was going to go back and forth with me. I said, "Don't." The husband came around and said I was yelling at the wife. And the wife said, "I'm sorry if I hit your vehicle." I said, "Apologies accepted." But the man wanted to go further with me. So that pissed me off. And I got out of my vehicle, got into his face, and back and forth. What came out of his mouth is "you people." So the "you people"
Yeah,
took me from this to there,
of
and
course.
I lost it. I lost it at the "you people," what he meant by "you people." I say at that moment in time, it felt like all my ancestral spirits
Yeah, absolutely. Woo, child.
were, so, not knowing that there was this big how do we call it, white dude standing who had come out of his vehicle to stand beside my vehicle, because according to him, he wanted to make sure that man did not hit me,
Oof.
because he saw me
Wow.
starting with the wife and him coming to me and
Wow.
me getting out of my vehicle to get into his face. So he needed to make sure that
That's rare.
and then he said he was going to call the police. I said, "Please call the police." So that is also the weaponization of the police. So I
Yep.
said, "You don't know the kind of woman you just crossed."
Right.
So it's the weaponization of police against Black
Yeah.
people,
Yes.
and being a single Black woman in the vehicle, being able to say bully me or subdue me or whatnot. So everything that I know that we're speaking about as women, as Black women, and everything, it's
Mhm.
like, no, it is
Mhm.
not acceptable. I may be alone, but I'm fighting for every Black woman.
Which is a lot for us to carry on our shoulders. And I also want to add to that, the reason why he thought he could get into your face is because there's also the stereotype that Black women are masculine, that we're just like men. We're not really women. We're not, because he probably would never do that, go into the face of another Indian or
Or
non-Black
white woman.
or white woman, because they see women as feminine, as something to be
Fragile.
protected, fragile, innocent.
Yeah.
But for you, he saw you, and how Black women are seen is we are basically the equivalent to men. We're not feminine. We're not meant to be protected. We're not fragile. We're not innocent. And that is a experience that we as Black women have to navigate daily.
So
I'm so sorry
jeez.
you went through that also. Lucky I wasn't there, because I would have been there with you. Ooh, child.
Oh, lordy, lordy, lordy. For me personally, I don't like any form of bully across the board. So it
Absolutely.
doesn't matter whether you're white, you black, you
Yes,
Chinese, you men, women, bullying,
of
it
course.
doesn't go with me. Yes. But superimposed on this was that ethnic racism that it's like I'm protecting my wife. We are doing a podcast, so I'm not going to swear. But you're protecting your wife. It's two women having an issue. Your
Exactly.
wife has apologized. I have accepted her apology. Case closed. But you think you're a man.
I'll tell you something. A lot of Indians that I know that do this work, anti-racism work, speak to their communities and they talk about the fact that Asian communities have a very extreme level of anti-Blackness that shows up in Asian
Yes.
and in Arab communities, to be honest. And so it is important for us. We can't talk just about how racism shows up in terms of whiteness impacting, Black, Indigenous, or racialized people. There is also the internalized kind of ethnic racism that you're talking about because of that racial hierarchy that's been created. And there is, on every level, every community outside of the Black community has a very strong level of anti-Blackness. And the point that's really important to understand for people is the root of white supremacy, the root of like racism is anti-Blackness.
Yes.
If you go to any part of the world, the people who are most darker skin or who are closer in proximity to how African people look are the ones that experience the most disparity, lack of employment, lack of access, and that is globally. So we know that anti-Blackness is at the root of all racism.
Okay. So it's very important you said that because we talk about racism, and sometimes forget anti-Blackness at the root of it all. So let's get to education because that is what you do the most. So what do you see as the role of education in combating racism? And when you look at the schools and the curriculum and everything, if you have any idea, what do you think, to be more inclusive of the different racial histories and
Mhm.
experiences? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that, our children grow up. I know for me, growing up here in Canada, being here since I was 2 years old, I grew up never seeing myself, never seeing representation. For you, growing up mostly back home, I'm assuming in Ghana,
Yeah.
you have a strong sense of self, right?
Girl, I only knew I was black when I came here, and
That's
that's not even my singular story. Many of us just got to know we were black when we got here.
Exactly. So there is a complete dichotomy between Black people who, grew up in the Caribbean or in the continent of Africa, and Black people who grew up here in so-called Canada. And like being here on, let's be honest, we're on stolen lands. This is
Yes.
Indigenous lands. They've been stolen. And so the history has been completely whitewashed in Canada,
Mhm.
where we're taught that, Canada is a country that, what is it, 150 something years old.
It's
And
older than that.
right. And that before that, who cares about what happened before that? That Black people, African people are also Indigenous people. And Indigenous peoples that are here on these lands, who are, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, they've been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? Thousands of years before as
Thousands,
well.
yeah.
And so that history is erased. The history of enslavement is erased, that there was over 250 years of enslavement, of slavery here in Canada. Um,
Yes.
the history of segregation is erased. The
Yes.
idea that Black nurses were not even allowed to get access to jobs and schooling and
Till the
education.
1950s. Yes.
Right. There
And they
was
had to school in the US.
absolutely. And people don't know that actually Canada tries to ascribe itself to being like the Underground Railroad and saving the Black people from enslavement. But the reality is actually, not only did Canada enslave Black people for 250 years, but Black people who became free or who were experiencing enslavement, they fled to the US because the conditions were better than Canada. Not to mention racist immigration policies. There was policies in place to say they wanted a white Canada,
Mhm.
only allowing Europeans in, immigrants, and not allowing Black people in until the 19, I think it was the 1980s actually, that law actually started to actually change and Black people were allowed to start to migrate here. So when you erase all of that history of what has been done, and then also you replace it with Canada is beautiful and diverse and loving and
Multicultural.
multicultural, and and you can be anything that you want, and you never see a role model of yourself. You never see teachers that look like you. You never see characters in books that look like you. That is a recipe for self-hatred. It is a recipe for not knowing yourself. It is a recipe for having an identity crisis. and also not having the tools on how to navigate the world. Because when you leave the classroom and you go into the world, you are a Black person, or, you know, navigating the world, and you experience racism.
It's, I don't know how the earlier people did it, because when I went to university, maybe there were one or two Black people in a lecture, and I was sharing with one of the girls that I got a D in anthropology because I opened my big mouth. The professor was saying something about the continent, and I
Ooh.
knew from my historical background, learning about, you know, Ghana, Mali, and Ghana, Songhai, and the Mali Empire, that what she's saying is not what I was taught in
Ooh.
Ghana. And I had read the books of I've forgotten his name. Professor Dubois, who was a
Yes,
historian. Yes.
yes,
So, and I love stories. So
yes.
you cannot tell a storyteller that you have done. And I love ancient Black stories as well. So I've read about Mansa Musa. I've read about Carthage and Hannibal and all those people. I knew a little bit about my people. So what she was saying was not. So
Mm-hmm.
I raised my hand and told her what I knew it was. And everybody was shocked I got a D. Even the TA, who was a South African white dude, looked at it like, because he took a look at my paper before I sent it. The guy just loved talking to me. It's like, that's a really good paper. This is an A paper.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came back, I showed it to him and it was a D. And he looked at me and I looked at him. It's like, you know what it is?
Yeah.
Yes. It's like, fight it. I said, no, she doesn't hold my future. And indeed, she did not hold my future. Here I am today. It's an experience I can share.
Unbelievable. And you know, the experience that you share is very common, unfortunately, which is
Yes.
you challenge the status quo, and you experience repercussions. You
Yes.
experience the consequences of challenging of that. I remember with my son growing up, similar things would happen where he would be in the school system, and I had to advocate for him because they're misrepresenting the continent of Africa. They're misrepresenting Black people in general. And when I would try to explain to him, like, you need to speak up for yourself. Trust me, don't worry. I will be there in the office when they tried to say something. And they would try to reprimand him. And I had to fight the system and the school systems because of that. So, uh, mm, mm-mm.
It's a lot. It's a lot. But let's talk about healing and moving forward, because how do we call it? Like, in your view, if we are to move forward as one human race, right? Both personally within our communities and affected by racial injustice, um, how do you think we can go about this?
Hmm. Well, you know, I'll be honest, there isn't a perfect, you know, answer to this. I think the reality is, if we quote, you know, Dr. King and many revolutionaries, and Dr. King, you know, day was just recently, that there's no love without justice. You know, there's no healing without justice. I think that this idea of a utopian society is hard to, you know, to try to manifest. But I think what we can do is, one thing about us as Black people and African people is that we are very loving people. I always say that, you know, the racist society and Europeans and those who have perpetuated violence against Black people, they're very lucky that what we're seeking is equity and not revenge, you know,
Yes.
because the global majority, which is Black and brown and racialized people globally, are the global majority. And so I think a big part of this is, it's twofold. One is we have to continue to fight for justice, for transformation in our communities. For policies, for legislation that actually changes one's life, whether it be healthcare, whether it be the school system, whether it be the prison system, whether it be, you know, access to employment, and all of the things. Those things literally change the life outcome of people's lives. So we have to fight for those changes. On the other hand, Black people, I'll speak for us as a community, people of African descent, we need to reclaim our healing. And part of our reclaiming our healing is reclaiming our languages, reclaiming our hairstyles, reclaiming our, you know, our dances, our food, being unapologetically ourselves, no longer, you know, trying to code switch in every place. There's things that we can control on a daily basis that allow us to have some level of liberation and ease. And I think that aspect of healing internalized racism, you know, into healing the things
But
that
I
we've
love
been.
code switching. I tell the girls, listen, I speak an African English when I meet the Africans. It's the same English, but it's an African English. There are different Englishes. If you don't
Absolutely.
understand, then it's not meant for you.
It's true.
If I
And code
speak my
switching is
African
important.
English and you want it, then I'll get another person to interpret it for you.
It's true. Listen, code switching is necessary. So we're never going to be able to get rid of it, because also how I interact with my family and my friends, that's sacred. I don't need to bring that into the spaces that I'm in. So I agree with you on that level.
Because sometimes I see my people come in, I look at them and they come in with their eyes and everything. And me too, I give them their eyes and give them, it's like, hey, you think I'm in uniform? Forget that. Oh, we are here. I am here. Now talk to me.
That's it. Once you do a little, they know. It's
they,
true.
they know you don't mess with it. But I do that most especially for my people in
Yes,
that because of my background as a registered nurse obstetrics, coming into an environment where you already feel judged and everything,
yes,
you need to meet somebody who understands your journey,
yes,
who is there for you, who will advocate for you. So, but then I also need to break the ice of the uniform, the differences in power dynamics, and not use it to subdue, but to encourage. Yes.
yes,
So that is where it comes in. And it's kind of funny, but it's really fun as well. And then we turn to between Jamaica and
yeah.
Ghana and let me say the Caribbean and the African, even sometimes from Rwanda. I don't speak any of their language or French, but they look at me, I look at them. For some reason, we speak a language.
Oh yeah. We feel connected.
We feel
Absolutely.
connected. And
Absolutely.
that's what I love about, doing what I do. And I'll say thanks to the works of people such as yourself, for me to get a balance when I came to Canada in my very early 20s, it's because of my Caribbean brothers and sisters
Hmm.
who had already gone through and knew the language, understood it, and were doing the fighting
Yeah.
and were on spoken word stages, expressing it, so that I could also, as a poet, come in and it's like, oh, okay, this is what I'm going through. It's validated. This
Yes.
is how you fight it. So
Yes.
I did not come in with the mind that I'm from Ghana, I'm better than Jamaica.
Exactly. We can't do that. No.
Rather, what I did, my sister, is look at Ghana history, look at Jamaica history, bridge it,
Oh, 100%.
bridge it. Very soon, I'm doing a Nancy story, and it has a history.
100%.
It has a history.
And bridging that gap is so important, because the diasporan wars do not serve us. They
It
keep
doesn't.
us separate, they keep us isolated. And the more that we begin to understand that our stories are deeply connected, that we, as a Black diaspora and African people across the globe, are really deeply interconnected, the more that we can support each other and build community no matter where we are. Because the reality is, when we're in the spaces that we are in workplace environments, we make them better. We make
Yes.
them more joyful. We make them more easeful. We are
Have
the
you
ones
met
that
me?
I want to work with you. Nana. I want to work with you.
Have you met me? This me, there's another me. I tell them, don't go look for her. Leave her there. The angry Black woman, leave her there. So
Hey,
nobody wants to meet her. They want to meet this. I said, good. Keep this because you cannot hold on to that.
I said the same thing to them.
Salam, thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you do. I have a whole lot of questions I didn't go through.
I'll come back. I'll come back.
We will be back with more, anti-racism, anti-Black racism conversations. And for my people all over in the diaspora and back home on the continent who watch the Nanaya Yabua podcast, you also got to understand that our stories are deeply connected. So
Mhm.
as we fight in this anti-racism and anti-Blackness in Canadian system, it's not only here. We travel around the world. You will meet it around the world. Get to know who you are, your ancestry, your story. Ground yourself so that when you get out there, nobody, you are unshakable. And for us, the women as well, for us female Black people, we have a lot to do. We carry our nations, we carry our people, and we continue to fight for our children, our children's children, 7 generations ongoing. And we are not stopping until there is some form of equity in this life. We are powerful. How do we find you, Salam?
So people can find me at salamdebs.com. That's my website, SELAMDEBS.com. And also on Instagram, Facebook, X, all of the different platforms. It's my name again, Salam Debs.
Please look for her and sign up for her anti-racism courses. It is really, really, oh my goodness, it is powerful. I listen to her, it's like, ooh, she's subdued here. She is subdued here because the amount of power that comes out of this woman, Lord have mercy. God bless you. God keep you safe. And thank you.
Thank you so much.